We need to talk about fire safety a little bit. Always have some kind of a digging tool and water source. Now, just off camera over there, we have a whole bucket of water and a fire extinguisher because we wanted to make sure nothing happened here. And we didn't get into trouble, because we are in fire season still. Whatever that looks like, but have, a substantial enough water to put the fire out. If you need to, or if a spark happens to, fly over someplace and get something going, have enough water to put that out, and something to dig with that you can, manipulate and push things away without getting your hands, worrying about burning your hands. I'm sure the rangers wouldn't say a digging stick's adequate, but it will do the job if you know what you're doing. So always have water and some kind of digging tool handy. Also, you want a cleared area, at least 5 feet out from the center of the fire pit in all directions. Those are the main things. And then just be careful and watch your fire. Any kind of wood fire is going to be high maintenance. We're used to just turning the knob on the fire on the stove, say, or flipping the switch on the thermostat, and we've got a constant heat right there without even thinking about it anymore. Doesn't work like that out in the woods, Any kind of fire is high maintenance. Somebody needs to be the fire watcher, and it can rotate. If you're keeping the fire going for warmth through the night because you have your shelters around here, designate fire watches. Everybody takes 45 minutes or an hour or a half hour, depending on how large your group is. Throughout the night, and their designated job is to watch that fire, maintain it at that constant heat, and make sure that no sparks go out and do anything. Now, speaking of sparks, some woods are way worse than others. The sequoia redwood is the worst that I've seen. It throws sparks horribly. Once we were camped somewhere, and that was basically the only firewood that was available, and yeah, we were having trouble with that. Fortunately, we did need to keep the fire going all night. But then there's other woods, like the hardwoods in particular, that hardly throw sparks at all. And so learn the woods in your area and what they do. And so if you're doing an all-night fire, try to use woods that don't throw sparks. So always stay safe with your fire. Always be, watching it, maintaining it. Just remember, any wood fire is high maintenance. It's either building up as you've just added new fuel, or it's dying down as what you've added already is burning up. And so you're going to constantly need to be tending it. Somebody's going to constantly need to be tending it. Okay, before we actually make a fire, let's talk about fire theory for a minute. In order to have fire, you need 3 things. The first one is oxygen, and we've got plenty of that all around us here in the air. The second one is fuel. So here's a nice big chunk of fuel. The third one is heat. Now, when we think heat, we need to take you back to physical science class and think of combustion temperature. In order for something to burn, it needs to be brought up to combustion temperature. I like to do the illustration here. Suppose I have a stick. I've even done this with larger sticks. I do have a friend who will confess having tried to start a fire this way, and he had a log, and he was holding a match up against the log, and well, I've got air, I've got fuel, and I've got an ignition source. And how come I don't have fire yet? Well, it's not burning. It's charring a little bit, but that's about all. Let me take my knife and take a wood chip here from that same spot. You can tell it's the same spot there that was charred. And now if I again try to ignite that, that catches on fire right away. So what's the difference? The difference is all about heat or combustion temperature. There isn't enough heat generated by the small flame of the lighter to get the big stick going, but there is enough heat to bring this little chip up to combustion temperature. Okay, this is more massive, and so it's going to take more massive amount of heat to bring this up to combustion temperature, whereas the small chip can be brought up to combustion temperature relatively easy because it's small size. Okay, now because we don't know how long our end time wilderness experience is going to last. I mean, we're going to be out there until Jesus comes. We need to take a fire starting method that's going to be sustainable. And this applies actually to all of our equipment. It all needs to be sustainable. Something that you can sustain and keep going in the wilderness basically indefinitely till Jesus comes. And we're going to illustrate that with fire starting methods here. Suppose I have a lighter as my fire starting method. Well, sooner or later this lighter is going to run out. Then what? Let's say I have matches for my fire starting method. Sooner or later I'm going to use my last match. Then what? So I need a fire starting method that will keep going, that I can keep using as long as I need to. And there isn't too many of those methods. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them here. The first one would be, say, a magnifying lens. Okay, as long as there's sun shining, I could make fire with the magnifying lens. But and it might be worth packing one of those along. Although, what if I need to make fire at night? Okay, that's not going to work then because the sun's not shining. So I need something else for then. The different friction fire methods, like the bow drill or hand drill and so on. It's definitely worth knowing how to do that, although that's really in a whole different league and beyond the scope of this particular video. So we're not going to touch on that here, but I definitely would encourage you to learn how to do that. And the method that I actually like best is the historic flint and steel method. Now, don't get this confused with a ferro rod. Those were mistakenly called flint and steel a lot, but they're not, and they do wear out and wear down, and then they're not good anymore. So this method has been around, I've heard of at least back to Roman times, probably earlier than that, but it's a historic method. It's been around for a long time. It is tried and true, and the way that it works is you have a flint, okay, rock with a sharp edge. The sharp edge is real important here. And you have a steel. This steel is heat treated so that it has a hard edge. It's carbon steel, it's been heat treated. And the way you make fire, here I'm getting tangled up with my string, is you strike the edge with a scraping blow to make sparks, and then you catch those sparks with some charred cloth, or charred punk wood works good too. Actually works better, it's just a little harder to work with. And go to my sharp edge, and this little torn section here I'm going to put close to the edge so those little fingers of fiber there can help catch the sparks. Now I need a sharper edge. There we go. Okay, so this has a very low combustion temperature, and a little bit of heat from those little sparks will catch, and because of the woven texture here, it spreads easily. Now, I'm actually going to pinch this out because before we, guess maybe I won't pinch it out. Before we make fire, I need to talk about a couple other things. Since we have such a small amount of fire that we're starting with, we need to have other small stuff that will catch fire from that, okay? The charred cloth catches it from that little spark. But then the next step up would be a Tinder Bundle. Now, a Tinder Bundle is real fine, you know, almost like hair fine material that we've made a little nest with. When we go to make fire, we'll put the glowing charred cloth in here, the ember in here. Actually, this works the same way with the friction fire method. You get a little ember and you put that, and then you blow that to flame. But this is going to burn up fairly quickly. And so you also want to have a handful of other, you know, just a little bit larger stuff like pine needles, and then small twigs, and then smaller and larger fuel wood. I've seen a lot of people, they get the fire going and with the pine needles, and then it starts to go out, and they try to jump from pine needles to larger stuff right away. The little twigs here, they somehow want to leave out of the equation. I don't know sure exactly why. But these little twigs are very key to that being the next step. And so, again, like I said, I've seen people, you know, they get this going and they add pine needles and the pine needles, but they burn up and then they start going out. Rush out and get some more pine needles quick because the fire's going out. And they keep burning pine needles and pine needles and pine needles. Well, those pine needles can be better spent, you know, as for debris for bedding or on your shelter or something. So you don't need a whole lot of them, but you need to have this next step. It's really important that you prepare all these steps before you even start to make fire. So, I mean, I had this already together before, but I wanted to show the importance of those steps before I went through the process. Now, the way you make this charred cloth or the charred punk wood is you need a little tin. If you don't have a tin, you actually could bury it in the sand underneath the fire. You want to burn it in the absence of air. And so this tin has a little hole here that I can close it up, and so put the material I'm going to char in there and line up the holes, and then put this in the fire, and flame and or smoke is going to spew out of this and while the charring process is going on. After a while that will slow down and then it'll finally quit, and I'll usually leave it in there a little bit longer to make sure it's fully cooked, and then take it out. You don't want to open it up right away. Then everything will just start burning because it's reached its combustion temperature still, or above its combustion temperature. But let it cool till it's cool enough to touch with your hands before you open it up, and then go ahead and try it and make sure that you got a good batch. So we're going to get another piece of charred cloth here and close up the tin so a spark doesn't get that going inadvertently. And strike up another spark. Sometimes you get it on the first strike, and sometimes you don't. Like my friend Damien likes to say, try to hit the least amount of rock with the greatest amount of force. So it's okay if you miss once in a while. There we go. And when you get a spark, don't just drop your striker. A lot of them have been lost that way. Carefully put it in a safe place so that you'll have it next time you need to make a fire. And then this goes into the Tinder Bundle. And then we'll fold this and start blowing on it gently. Turn sideways here, you can see what I'm doing a little better. This can make a lot of smoke, and so you kind of want to hold it above your face so that when you go to take a breath of fresh air, you can, at least turn your head down and get a breath of fresh air rather than inhaling a whole bunch of smoke and then coughing and spitting and losing your fire in the process. Now, as soon as it bursts to flame, carefully put it down into your fire pit and add your pine needles. And as the flame starts pushing past that, add the little twigs. And when they get burning well, you'll add the larger twigs. Now, I think this is as far as we're going to go with the process. Again, it's fire season, and we don't want to risk anything getting away from us here or get anybody mad at us in the process either. But just keep in mind the steps. You're adding larger and larger stuff, but you're not adding it necessarily unless you do a special fire lay before or ahead of time. Now, the fire needs heat to keep itself burning, and that heat usually takes the shape of a bed of coals in the center of the fire. And so as you're laying on the sticks, you want to lay them on so that you build up that bed of coals to maintain that heat. If you don't maintain that heat, you'll end up with a smoky mess. Flame is burning smoke, and so if the smoke isn't hot enough to combust, if it hasn't reached its combustion temperature, you're just going to have smoke. And you'll notice that in a minute here as this burns out. When the flames quit, there'll be a lot more smoke than there is right now. And so to build that back up, you would need to add more little stuff to get the heat of the fire back up. But again, the main, the essential heat core, which usually takes the form of a bed of coals in the center of the fire, you want to work to establish that and maintain that. Sometimes for cooking you want coals, and so you want to pull your coals out from the center of the fire, but don't pull so many coals out that you lose that central heat core. If you do, you're going to have to almost go back and start over again with a little bit of fire that you have and, add little things on there. So it's probably good to have, some more little sticks handy. Notice I didn't use them all just in case I needed to go back to that. Now, I grabbed my cook pot really quick and put some water in it. Let's say I want to boil this water to purify it for drinking or to make a stew or mush or something. A lot of people do all sorts of fancy fire cranes to hold the fire, the pot over the top of the fire like this, and that works quite well. However, we've found that just putting the, on, ideally, let's say we have a nice bed of coals here, to bring some coals out and set your cook pot on top of that. This water will heat from the side just as easy as it'll heat from the bottom. And so that works quite well, and it's much simpler and easier than having some kind of a fire crane or setting that all up. And we've had it there. See the smoke coming off from when the flames quit, okay? So we've lost our combustion temperature. We've lost the temperature enough that the smoke isn't combusting. But you still get the picture here of putting the cook pot just on the side. You could have cook pots all the way around here and several people be cooking. Notice also I'm using my digging stick again for cooking, which brings up another interesting idea of the digging stick. Because you're using it in connection with food, you want to keep this end relatively clean. So this is the clean end of the digging stick. This is the part that we dig with or rearrange fire pieces with. So we let this end get dirty. This is the dirty end and clean end. And this is also the mallet end, because the mallet, using it as a mallet doesn't necessarily get it dirty. So I have a ring carved, little notch carved there, and I can easily bring my cook pot in and out of the fire that way. Or maintaining the fire at a constant heat for either cooking or for heat or for light can be a bit of a challenge, and just want to throw this out as a good exercise. Point somebody to be the fire tender so that they can do that, because if it's everybody's job, it ends up not getting done. Somebody needs to be watching that fire, and as soon as it starts dying down a little bit, to add more fuel. Might be everybody's responsibility to make sure there's plenty of fuel to add, so that the person who's responsible doesn't have to go run and gather fuel, because by the time he gets back with the fuel, it may have died too much. But you want to keep it going at a constant heat, and that's basically just something experience is going to have to teach you. Don't necessarily want to just, the answer for that isn't to just build this huge fire. There's a saying that the Indians had, a white man builds this big fire, he has to stand way back, and in front of him is cooking and the back of him is cold. Whereas the Indian builds a little fire and gets up close and he's warm all over. The reason for that is a small fire will make this bubble of warm air, in this whole area here. When it's going, let's say, about this size of a fire ring, let's say, this is good size. Let's say we had a good fire going in this bit here. It would make this area here, probably, 8-foot diameter area here, kind of warmer than outside. And so if you were inside that area, you could get fairly close to the fire because it's not so hot that you couldn't get close. You can cook or do whatever crafts you're doing with the fire and not have to be way back, and you're still warm. And it's just, time after time I've had groups out and we've done that, and the people have just been amazed at how small a fire can actually provide so much warmth. Keep in mind that all the directions are based on the rotation of the Earth. And this illustration here shows that quite easily. What you'll need for this is a shadow stick. The shadow stick needs to be relatively straight. This is my demonstration one, so it's so carved pretty. You don't have to worry about any of that. And we need to put it in the ground as straight up and down as possible. Okay, now once it's in the ground, you want to keep it very, very stable, and so don't bump it or move it at all, because that'll throw your accuracy off. The other thing you need are some marker stakes, which you could use just about anything for this. I just have some, again, this is my demonstration set, so I have some little sticks, and they're all carved nicely. But, you could even just use rocks. And we want to mark the tip of the shadow, not just the shadow. It's important to mark the tip of the shadow. And so we'll come back throughout the day and continue to mark the tip of the shadow at different spots. As the world turns, the shadow's going to move. And so maybe be thinking, what pattern is this going to do? We'll find out here in a bit. Okay, here we are back a couple hours later, and we got a little bit of shade from the tree there. And so if you're having a little trouble telling exactly where the tip of the shadow is, you can put your finger on the top of the shadow stick like this. And where the two shadows, you got a shadow going this direction and then the shadow from the shadow stick going that direction. That can usually help you find where that tips of the shadow's at. So let's go ahead and put in another stake. Okay, we'll come back again in a bit. We've obviously lost our sun, so we've lost our shadows here, but you can still see the sticks. This is the first one we put in, and then these are some other ones that we've put in throughout the day. And as you see, they've kind of forming roughly, they're in a line. Not exactly, but roughly they're still in a line, and that's significant. As we mentioned earlier, all of the directions are based on the rotation of the Earth. So what does this tell you, this pattern that we see here, what does this tell us as far as which direction the Earth is rotating? Okay, so if the shadows are moving this direction, that means the Earth is moving away from the sun, and so that it's rotating in this direction here. So that would put the rotation of the Earth in this direction with the poles up in this direction or that direction to the poles. Now, exactly which direction that might be is we look at our line and find the shortest distance from the shadow stick to the line, which is going to be right about here. And so this is, these sticks are going to be in roughly an east-west line, and this is going to be roughly north-south in this direction here. This one being, since we're in the northern hemisphere, this is pointing to the North Pole, that would be pointing to the South Pole. Now, shadow sticks or compasses or other direction finding devices like this, they don't tell you which way you need to go, okay? You need to know yourself which way you want to go. This just tells you which way is which and keeps you from getting turned around. Now, you need to start practicing directional awareness, which means keeping track of three things, and they're not in any special order, but basically is where you are, how you got there, and which direction you're going. Just keeping track of those three things all the time. In other words, at the beginning of a hike, you sit there and determine the directions and which direction you're going to be hiking. For example, if we're going to be hiking that way, we know we need to come back the opposite direction. And if we set up a shadow stick, figure out what the pattern is, okay, that's the way we're going, this is the way we're coming back. Keep track of any landmarks along the way, if there's any major bends in the trail, which direction are we going now after we make the bend in the trail, and so on. So it's just always keeping track of those things. Which way you're going, where you are, how you got there, okay? Because if you don't pay attention to those things, you might get out there. If you don't know how you got there, so what that you find out which way north, south, east, and west is? That's not going to tell you which way you need to go back. Okay, that's something you have to keep track of. Since we're talking about this, let's go ahead and mention there's two main reasons that people get lost. The first one is simply not paying attention to where they're going, which figures into what we've just been talking about. Got to be paying attention to where you're going, but that's the main reason people get lost. They're simply not paying attention to where they're going. The other main reason people get lost is by not trusting things like the shadow stick that do tell them directions and which way's which. I remember a story a friend of mine told us that he was out in the woods with another friend of his, and they had been out there for a while, wandering around, doing what they were doing, and they finally realized, well, it's time to start heading back. And my friend thought, well, we need to go this way, and his friend that was with them was saying, no, we need to go that way. And so they talked about it a while and realized, well, let's just go down to the creek finally and see which way the creek's flowing, and then we'll know for sure. And so they went down to the creek, and from my friend's perspective, he says the creek was flowing the wrong direction. We can get turned around. Okay, we don't have an inherent sense of direction ourselves, so we need to trust these things that will show us which way is which, like the shadow stick, where the sun's at, direction the water's flowing in the creek, and so on. Hopefully we've noted those things before in our relationship to them as we're coming in, so we know which way we need to go to get out. Now, it's interesting and definitely worth mentioning that people are lost spiritually for those exact same two reasons. There's a lot of people that aren't paying attention to where they're going spiritually, and they're going to be lost just because they end up not where they want to be necessarily. The other reason is people that don't trust God, who's telling us which way to go. And so, just keep in mind that people are lost for those same two reasons, both physically and spiritually. If you do recognize that you are lost, okay, I want to teach an acronym based on the word STOP, okay, S-T-O-P. The first one stands for stay, stop, okay. T stands for think. Now notice that these first two are the exact opposite of panicking and running, which is what people have a tendency to do when they feel that they're lost. I remember a long time ago reading a story about this hunter who was very well equipped with good clothing on and everything, and he felt that he'd gotten lost, and he just panicked and ran. And they found him a couple days later, a mile or so away, and he was basically naked and dead. And so putting two and two together, they realized, he started running, the rifle was heavy, dropped that, his pack was heavy, dropped that, clothing got stuck on bushes, he just took it off and left it. He just panicked and ran. Finally, he got so exhausted he couldn't run anymore and basically died from exposure that night when it got cold. Whereas if he had kept what he had with him, he could have survived no problem. So it's really important that we don't panic and run. And therefore, these first two on this acronym are to stay and think. S-T-O. O stands for observe. Okay, look around. Look for familiar landmarks. Set up a shadow stick. Determine the directions. What things can you observe that might help you find your way? And the last one is P. S-T-O-P. P stands for plan. Okay, put together a plan and then carry it out. Now, in my thinking, P also stands for the survival priorities. Remember, shelter, water, health concerns, fire, and food. This is what your plan's going to be based on, providing these things for you for the next little bit until you find your way out or until you're found or whatever. But put a plan together based on the survival priorities. P also stands for pray, if you haven't done that yet. Hopefully you did that back at the very beginning. But just in case you forgot, that's to remind you there. So stay, think, observe, and plan based on the priorities, and be sure and pray.